it's a Saturday and I'm working again. But today is a good day. So earlier this week, the president signed into law and published in the Government Gazette the Civil Union Amendment Act. And now the big function of this act was mainly to do one thing, and that was to repeal Section 6 of the Civil Union Act. And that's a big deal. So in order to give you a little bit of context into the weight of what this means, we have to go back all the way to the Marriages Act. So a couple of years ago, same-sex couples and same-gender couples were not allowed to be married under South African law. So obviously there was a very great need for this, and then a lot of activists pushed for this to be included in South African law to give effect to the equality clause in the Constitution, right? So the equality clause in the Constitution effectively states that nobody may be discriminated on a number of specified grounds, and those things include things like race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, etc., etc. But at the time, the Marriages Act did not provide for same-sex and same-gender couples to be married, because it was very specific as to who may enter into a marriage, right? So there was a problem. And so consultation was had about how that law should be amended and what should be done about it. Initially, the Marriages Act was going to be amended, but there was very, very strong pushback from a number of people, and specifically a lot of religious organizations who were opposed to the idea of including same-sex and same-gender couples to be married under the Marriages Act for all kinds of religious purposes. And so on that basis, a whole new piece of legislation was promulgated in order to give effect to those rights, right? So you have the Marriages Act for effectively opposite gender and opposite sex couples, and then the Civil Union Act was promulgated to provide for same-sex and same-gender couples to be married under South African law. This was a very big deal when this law was promulgated. At the time, there might have been only 4 or 5 countries around the world that had made provision for effectively gay marriage in their legislation, right? And South Africa had been one of the first countries around the world to do that, and effectively the first country in Africa to do that. I mean, that was like a really, really big deal and a big victory for queer people everywhere in this country. But that said, there was a clause in the Civil Union Act that was problematic. There is some legal distinction between marriage and civil union, but I'm going to use the word marriage interchangeably here for both of the purposes of this conversation. So in order to get married in this country, what you need to do is you need to go to the Department of Home Affairs, and a marriage officer will effectively solemnize your marriage, and that is how you become officially married legally. So now marriage officers work for the Department of Home Affairs. They provide a service on behalf of the government to its people, and one of the things that was highly problematic in the Civil Union Act was that Section 6 of that act provided that a marriage officer could refuse to solemnize a marriage on the basis of religion or conscience. So if you were in a same-sex or a same-gender relationship and you approached the marriage officer to solemnize your union, they could refuse to do it. And so what that effectively meant was that a government official, a marriage officer, could refuse to provide you a service that you are supposed to be entitled to solely on the basis of your gender or your sexual orientation. Yeah. So Section 6 had been very, very problematic for a number of queer people in this country who wanted to get married but struggled to do so because the Department of Home Affairs marriage officials refused to solemnize their unions or their marriages because the legislation allowed them to discriminate against queer people. Like, how problematic is that? Yeah. So what this new bit of legislation, the Civil Union Amendment Act, does is it repeals Section 6 of the Principal Act. And so what that means is that no marriage officer may refuse to solemnize a marriage for whatever reason. So if you are working for the state, if you are a marriage officer working for the Department of Home Affairs, you cannot refuse to solemnize a marriage. Doesn't matter if you agree with somebody's sexual orientation, if you're opposed to that, whatever your religious beliefs are. Sorry. Which in a constitutional democracy that is based on fundamental human rights and dignity and equality is absolutely fair. I don't think it's unreasonable for people to be asked to be treated fairly. If you want the same rights afforded to yourself, you must extend those same rights to other people as well, irrespective of how they identify, or what their sexual orientation is, or what their gender identity is, or where they come from, or who they are. So to go even further than that, to highlight how problematic this was, 40%, if not more, I think, of the marriage officers that are working for DHA refuse to solemnize same-sex marriages or same gender marriages. 40%. Like, wow. Now, can you imagine if you're living in a place where there's only one Home Affairs office and that marriage officer at that particular office refuses to solemnize a marriage? It's not like you can, go 20 kilometers down the road and then there's another DHA office, right? So there are some people who are living in specific areas where that DHA officer blatantly refused to marry them on the basis of conscience or religion. And in order for them to get married, they would have to literally travel to another province or travel almost 100 kilometers just to find somebody who would be able to solemnize that union, which is extraordinary to me in a constitutional democracy. So in my reading of the legislation, the Minister of the Department of Home Affairs has 24 months before this comes into full effect. And so what that means is that marriage officers who had applied to the Department of Home Affairs to refuse to solemnize certain types of marriages on the basis of their religion, that application will now lapse 2 years from the 22nd of October 2020. And on top of that, the Minister of the Department of Home Affairs is also mandated by this bit of legislation to ensure that every single Department of Home Affairs office around the country has at least one marriage officer who is able to solemnize same-sex or same-gender marriages. This is such an important bit of legislation for our country, effectively taking steps forward in the realization of queer rights in South Africa, which is amazing. Now, just on a closing note, there are a number of moves that are being made in advocacy spaces to effectively create one comprehensive act that speaks to marriages broadly. So currently we have two bits of legislation. The first one that speaks to effectively straight people getting married, and the other one that speaks to queer people getting married. Which in its very nature, the fact that there are two bits of legislation is problematic and potentially discriminatory on the basis that there are already two, right? And so people are working towards having one bit of legislation that includes all kinds of marriages, and so that the legal obligations that a marriage creates on a particular couple are fair, that they are governed by the same bits of legislation, so that further down the line we don't run into issues like this around whether to amend this bit of this act because this is problematic in that kind of way. So there are strides being made for having one inclusive act that governs all marriages and unions, which I think is a great idea. Okay, cool. I hope this video was helpful because I'm really excited and this is amazing. If you've been enjoying this content, please remember to hit that subscribe button. I would really appreciate that, and turn on the bell for notifications. And you can head over to Instagram to follow me there for more videos and stories. Okay, I've got a meeting now. Until next time, ciao.